is just not true. And so they're trying to set up a situation where there is just, frankly, unrest if this false notion of him winning now, which he might at the end, a place like Pennsylvania, if it doesn't come to pass. And it's not good.
But I know Pennsylvania Republicans. I'm from Pennsylvania.
Hi, hello there. Wow, what a time to be alive. 2020. Hello to anybody watching on Instagram Live. This is my first Instagram Live. But my name is Eric Berry, and I'm an American in Berlin. And this is our first podcast episode. If you are listening on your phone or in iTunes, what have you, it's November 4th, 2020. I'm sitting here in my new apartment, my WG, or WG in English pronunciation, which is what you call a shared flat in Germany. And I'm watching the U.S. election results come in. They just called Michigan for Biden a little bit ago. So I recently moved to Germany about a month ago, and I've been in Berlin for 2 weeks. And with everything going on with the election, and no matter who wins, and with everything going on with the virus, etc., I know so many people, and Americans in particular, who have really reflected on this year and their lives, and we're just looking to restart. And for a lot of people, that has meant moving their lives to a whole new country. And so that's what I did. I decided to move to Berlin during the pandemic, and I thought now's probably a better time than ever to start documenting that process and sharing what it's like, and hopefully it'll be somewhat informative. Hopefully it will be somewhat entertaining, and if nothing else, for me, it'll be nice to have that as a little record for me. And yeah, just some things up front. This is not going to be a super polished podcast, as I'm sure you can already tell. I just don't have the resources to put that kind of production in right now. So for now, it's just going to be me, and I'll be digging into my own journey of becoming a resident here. Maybe I'll have some guests on down the line. I really don't know how this is going to evolve. There will probably be some cursing, by the way, just a very loose conversation, so I hope I'm not offending anybody. But yeah, for now, it's just a conversation with myself. So for the first episode, I thought I'd just kind of lay out the groundwork of how I wound up here. In terms of why I wanted to move, I've lived in 3 major cities in the U.S., and I'm just turned 35, and I guess as I've gotten older and like living in the U.S. system, I've just become increasingly frustrated with things like not having universal health care, just like how wrought with capitalism the whole country is, and the rat race, and the stress of living that life. And, you know, when my parents were like 22 or 23, they were able to buy their first home, and they didn't come from a wealthy background. It's just, we live such different lives in terms of generational differences. And because I ended up getting let go from a job a few years ago and just decided to travel to Southeast Asia from New York, and that ended up going from what was going to be a month-long trip to like 3.5 months, and I got exposed to so many other people from other countries, and I just saw seemingly how much happier they were, and I was like, whoa, so there is another way than how it is in the U.S. And so I'd been having that thought for quite some time, and just personally I thought it'd be cool to try living in another country. And then 2020 happened, and I had gone to Ecuador to research a novel that I'm working on, and the virus hits. I end up being they closed the borders in Ecuador, and I lived in Brooklyn, New York. Like, I certainly didn't want to go back in March, April, time span to the epicenter of the world. But it gave me a lot of time to reflect, and I just saw how the U.S. was dealing with that, and Trump, and eventually I get a flight back late May, and then George Floyd happens. And obviously the racial inequities of our country are longer than its own history. But just seeing how people were reacting to that and the police brutality, all this kind of stuff keeps happening. I was unemployed. And I said, you know what? I'm just done with the United States. Had a lot of time to reflect while I was in Ecuador and decided, okay, I'm going to escape to Germany. My lease in Brooklyn ends at the end of July. Eventually I get back to New York. And what do you know? Because of our response to coronavirus, we end up getting banned from the European Union. So, all right, what now? I knew it didn't make sense to re-sign a whole year lease in New York. And I said, I just got to get out. I don't know how this election's going to go. And I feel like I've run my course. I've given it my all in the U.S. And frankly, just couldn't afford it, like financially, like I said, healthcare wise and so forth to stay. And Albania was actually one of the countries we were allowed into. So I said, screw it. And I bought a ticket. And less than 24 hours later, I was on a plane to Albania. In between then, I had applied to grad school in Germany because I found out in Ecuador from some of my hostel mates that you can get a free education regardless of being a citizen in Germany. And that is indeed true. If it's at a public school, whether it's your bachelor's or master's, and I believe a doctorate as well, you can get that for free. And so I kind of applied on a whim late May, ended up moving to Albania. And then surprise, like genuine surprise, I thought they were supposed to get back to me a couple months before that the application was lost. But while I was in Albania, I got an email, congratulations, you've been accepted into grad school in Berlin. And that allowed me to enter the EU, despite the fact that most Americans are banned. And that's how I wound up here. In terms of why Berlin, Berlin is such a unique city. I honestly had not even considered Germany until a couple of years ago when I went on a last minute vacation here before starting a new job, and they happened to have the cheapest flights here. And when I got to Berlin, it was this very cool combination, if you've ever visited or lived in these cities, of some of like the gritty undergroundness of Bushwick, Brooklyn, but then a lot of the very like liberated, if you will, like just crazy wacky side of San Francisco. And I really liked that combination. As I mentioned, Germany has free education, higher education. They have universal health care, albeit not perfect. I'll get into that in another episode. And the spirit of the German people that I have met traveling has been so cool, just in terms of they're such open people. And like, despite the stereotype, I find them to be very humorous. They're like oddly obsessed with different aspects of American culture, and in particular, stand-up comedy. So I've met so many Germans who are traveling who are obsessed with stand-up comedy, and I come from that background. I'm like, that's cool. And now, having been in Berlin, there's actually a pretty thriving stand-up scene and a thriving English-speaking stand-up scene. I know a couple American comedians who have worked here for some years. So the other thing which I'll touch on is, and there's no way to deny it's such an integral part of what Berlin is, they have this very like thriving, robust sex scene, like an alternative sexual community. Of course, LGBT queer stuff, but also just like it's a party city, if I'm being totally honest. I mean, there are drugs, there's club pre-corona, there was clubs that never closed. You would go on a Thursday, literally sleep in the club, or depending on what you're on, not sleep at all, and leave Monday morning. Crazy stuff happening in these places, and all legal. And that's an important aspect of culture for me and my own personal life. So yeah, Berlin was just ticking all of these boxes, and I am taking German lessons, but also the reality of Berlin is you really don't need to know how to speak German. I would say conservatively 80% of people here speak excellent English. and certainly if they're under the age of 40. So yeah, these were all the things that made me say, all right, I'm going to Berlin, and because of grad school, I was able to get in. This is a very introductory episode, as I mentioned, in terms of just how we got here. This is going to post a little bit late because I have to submit it to iTunes, and that's a whole rigmarole process. But in future episodes, yeah, I just kind of want to document my weekly journey through this. I'll touch on specific topics like getting registered here. I did recently perform stand-up comedy before this most recent lockdown, what that's like, what the lockdown is like, shopping here, German toilets, it's a thing, especially if you're from the U.S. It's so different here. I want to cover all of this stuff. But for now, that will do it. Next episode, as I mentioned, I want to talk about all that kind of stuff. And I hate asking this, but if you're listening in iTunes, if you can please go and rate and leave a review for the podcast, it helps the show tremendously. In terms of getting discovered, just search for An American in Berlin. And if you want to follow more of the journey, you can follow me on Instagram at Eric Berry Writes. And yeah, thank you to everybody there. Sorry, I was kind of ignoring you guys. I've never done an Instagram Live, but I am recording a podcast right now on my computer. So till next week, no matter where you are in the world, be well and be loved.